In economics, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Joshua Hill, who's a senior product manager for AI and strategic initiatives for Macmillan, and Justin Wolfers, who is a professor at the University of Michigan and a frequent person to appear on media on various economic topics. Both of them have been very, very involved in the AI discussion in education and economics education in particular. Both of them have been integral in developing our AI tools and developing tools for AI in general. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Justin and Joshua to get into our presentation. Oh, before I do, you are able to chat with one another on this system. So if the attendees, if you want to chat with one another, you may use the chat function. If you want to speak to us, if you want to ask us a question, please use the QA function. We do want to hear from you, but because we had over 300 people register for this, we cannot have you unmuted. We do need to use the chat for you to speak to one another, the QA for you to speak with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much.
Well, first of all, just g'day to everyone. Great pleasure to be here. I was talking last night to Joshua Hill, who's going to be my co-presenter here today, and I was really nervous. I was like, Joshua, is everything going to work? And we were going over our slides, and halfway through me listening to me freak out, Joshua was like, Justin, yesterday you're on CNN and MSNBC and you weren't worried about that. And I said, Joshua, that's because this is an audience I care about, and this is a set of topics that I care a lot about. So I'm going to start by introducing Joshua, because he may not be familiar to everyone. So I'm an economics professor. I teach at the University of Michigan. I'm the author of an economics textbook, and I have taken a great joy in diving headfirst into AI. Now, any economist who wants to learn, dig deep into AI, we have both a comparative advantage, we're economists, and a comparative disadvantage, which is we're not technologists. Joshua is my secret weapon. I have managed to corner the market in the only person on earth who's an economics PhD and has a long history both as an economics instructor and working on economics education, and then transitioned to become an AI engineer. And so that's who Joshua is, and you will quickly discover why I love working with him so much. So let me begin at the beginning, which is with slides, because that's what economists do when we talk to each other. And so what I want to do is actually just start by talking about where we are in AI and where this talk will fit in. And so I'm going to, roughly speaking, you can think about there as there being, I think, three phases to how AI is going to transform economics education. Actually, there's four. The first, step zero, was all of our colleagues, you probably remember this well, stuck their head in the sand like ostriches and pretended that AI wasn't happening. That was step zero, and so the fact that you're on this call means you're not part of step zero, so I want to congratulate you on that. Then we all freaked out when we realized that AI basically meant that any student who had copy and paste on their computer could pass any of our assessments almost perfectly. And so that raised a real problem for all of us. How do we have assessment with integrity when students have access to AI? That was phase one. Phase two is, okay, now we have this technology. It's pretty cool technology. What can we do with this technology to make us more effective as teachers? How can we make it our friend? How can it be a complement to what we do? And phase three, I think, is going to be revolution. Phase three is going to be this question of what is it we should teach a generation of students who are going to grow up with a computer in front of them that has the equivalent of 100 Einsteins inside it. What are the skills they're going to need? What is the labor market going to look like? What is the economy going to look like? And therefore, backing back from that, what is it we should be teaching them? So where are we on this pathway? I've talked in the past quite a bit about the problems of assessment and how we can try to fix them. I'm going to very quickly just refer you to two past talks that I've given, which really tried to address those problems. So the QR codes are up there right now, so you can quickly snap and hopefully you'll get through and be able to watch those talks if that's the issue you're worried about. But I don't want to repeat too much of that old ground. So what I want to do today is focus on this second phase, which is how is it that we as economics instructors can use these tools more effectively? And so I'm going to do some combination of sort of how does an economist think about this, what is the broad picture, and then get into some real design issues, some of which I've learned from Joshua. Back to where the conversation around AI had begun. Remember I said we began with the conversation being about assessment, that we're all worried we couldn't have assessment. And so Adrian Wooldridge, who used to be the editor of The Economist, wrote this column asking, can Oxford and Cambridge save Harvard from ChatGPT? His point was that what was happening at Harvard and all North American universities was that we would assign our students homework. The students could then go home and simply ask ChatGPT to do it for them, and that would be the end of the story. That was not what occurs at Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge has a different system, an archaic system called the tutorial system. With the tutorial system, you meet with your tutor. This is a real photo of a real Oxford tutorial. You meet one-on-one or sometimes two-on-one. You will have prepared a paper, a 10-page paper usually before that tutorial. And then your tutor will ask you to explain and defend that paper. You can see for someone who's worried about assessment integrity that this is great because now you as a person, one-on-one in your professor's office, your tutor's office, have to defend the arguments that you'd written up. It's obvious that it's you, not ChatGPT, that's doing the work here. So that solves the assessment problem, but also this is Bloom's 2 sigma. This is exactly the sort of scenario that Bloom was looking at where he argued that you would get a 2 standard deviation rise in test scores because the tutor is talking directly to the person at their level with their interests, responding to the gaps in their knowledge rather than just preparing a speech and saying it out loud. The problem with this idea is it's enormously uneconomic. It's incredibly, wait a minute, I still fear I have the wrong slides here. I still do. I am going to continue anyway. Okay, because I know all this. So the problem with this is a great opportunity, right? Wonderful, wonderful form of education. The problem is it's incredibly uneconomic. At the moment, I teach 500 students. So it would require 500 tutors or maybe 250 tutors to do my job. If I went to my dean and said, hey, I have a great idea, I can improve student outcomes, all I need is 249 more faculty hires, they would chase me out of their office immediately. But the question that I want to ask is, can we replicate what we get from tutoring one-on-one, an in-depth exploration of a particular student's knowledge gaps using AI? So that's the idea here. So in some sense, what we want, what Adrian Wooldridge was suggesting is we should have personalization, where here I'm showing you each tutor is meeting one-on-one with another student. Personalization at scale would require many, many tutors, but what we can actually do is instead have each student one-on-one talking with an AI that understands them and is listening to them and is spotting the gaps in their knowledge. And so that's the big idea here. So why does personalization at scale matter? Let me start with the scale part. The scale part is pretty easy, which is whenever you're teaching a large number of students, whenever you're teaching a large number of students, what matters is anything that can save you any amount of time. So if I teach 500 students and AI can save me 1 minute per student per week, that's 500 minutes right there. 500 minutes, let's call that 10 hours. If a typical instructor is paid $100 an hour, I know some are paid more, some are paid less, that's saving $1,000 per week. And over the course of a 12-week semester, that'll save your economics department $12,000, right? So right there, that's a lot of money. But that's not the half of it. And this is the part I'm really excited about. So I'm going to turn off my screen because I actually just want to share my excitement about this. Let's imagine that we can design AI that's as good as a tutor for one-on-one exploring of students' knowledge and students' knowledge gaps. So what are the consequences of that going to be? Well, Bloom tells us that that will lead their understanding to improve by 2 standard deviations. Right, so what are the economic implications of that? By the way, I'm going to attempt to do long multiplication while standing up, so wish me luck. Bloom says we can improve student performance by 2 standard deviations. All right, let's try and translate what that would then mean for the earnings of your students. So Klein and Walters have a rule of thumb. They've looked at a whole lot of literature, a whole lot of studies of interventions that raised people's test scores. And the rule of thumb from that is if you can raise a test score by 1 standard deviation, that will raise your earnings by 10%. What we normally see is raising test scores by less than 1 standard deviation, say raising test scores by 1/10 of a standard deviation, but that raises earnings by 1%. So multiply my 2 by 0.1. And so now, if we succeed at solving the Bloom's 2 sigma problem, we can raise earnings by 20%. 2 times 0.1. Now, 20% would be magnificent. And the thing is, this literature says you're raising lifetime earnings by 20%. The lifetime net present value of earnings of a typical economics undergraduate is around about $1 million. So therefore, for each student, you're raising their lifetime earnings, if you can actually truly profoundly teach them economics 2 standard deviations better, by $200,000. Now I have 500 students in my class. So that then means that I'm raising student earnings, if I succeed at this, by $100 million. But that's when I remember, actually, economics is only 1/4 of the time they spend in class. And so I can't actually get that big of an effect. I only get 1/4 of their time. So therefore I say, maybe I'm going to get 1/4 of the impact. Let's multiply these numbers out, and all of a sudden you'll see that if we solve the Bloom's 2 sigma problem, we raise the net present value of the earnings of the kids who are sitting in front of me by $25 million. I didn't misspeak. I didn't shift to 0. I didn't get anything wrong. It's saying if we can learn better teaching techniques that can replicate the gains from one-on-one tutoring, and you're teaching 500 people, you can raise the net present value, the future earnings of the kids in front of you, if you teach large classes like I do, by $25 million. And some of you might teach 2 classes a semester and 2 semesters a year. So these are massive, massive, massive gains. Now, maybe you don't think this is realistic. Fair enough. I agree. It turns out that subsequent research on the 2 sigma problem suggests that that one-on-one tutoring raises test scores by closer to about 0.6 standard deviations. So that means we've got to, roughly speaking, scale back our estimates by about down to 30% of what I suggested before. And you might think it's unrealistic that you and I this afternoon are going to learn some technologies that are going to close that full gap between full class teaching versus one-on-one tutoring. So let's say you're only going to get 1/5 of the way there. Well, that math still tells you that each class you teach, if you can teach it using strategies that can replicate 1/5 of the benefits of one-on-one tutoring through personalized learning, then you're going to end up raising the net present value of the kids in front of you by $1.5 million. And if you do 4 classes a semester, you'll do $6 million per year. And I understand that this is the sort of romantic language that only an economist could love, because underneath all of that, what you're really doing is transforming lives. And you're providing students with the tools to go and live richer, better, fuller lives, which I think is why all of us are here. So what I want to do now is just turn back to trying to trying to think about how we might do that. Okay. So the big idea here is, if personalization can yield these enormous gains, because the thing that personalization does is, sitting with a student and probing their knowledge gaps, you can fill those knowledge gaps. If we can figure out ways to use AI to do that, then we can be enormously more effective. And so today, Joshua and I are going to show you two new applications. One is that we come up with before class, which is how we can get students to engage with the content before class, engage with their readings, for instance. And after class, how we can provide them with homework provide them for help with their homework while they're working through things. Now, Joshua in a moment is going to show you the first of those two, and then I'll talk a little more, and then he'll show you the second of those two. But before we get there, I just want to remind you of what I think is one of the most important things when evaluating AI. AI is imperfect. So I want to remind you, and it's really easy to make AI look imperfect, but that's not the relevant question here. So I want to remind you one of the most important principles of economics, the opportunity cost principle. So whenever I'm thinking about having a burger, I always remember the opportunity cost is I could spend that money on a pizza instead. And so here, I'm saying when you're thinking about using AI tools to augment your teaching, realize the next best opportunity to using tools that are provided at little or no cost is not having a perfect instructor sit down one-on-one with each of your students for as many hours as they want. Instead, certainly for me at the University of Michigan, my next best option is to have a pretty good teaching assistant sit down with my students. I think my students are, my PhD students are wonderful, wonderful people. They're still learning their craft. They get most things right, but they don't get everything right. And that's my next best option. And the reason I raise that is because I don't at any point want to make the case to you that AI is perfect. But as you engage with the sorts of answers that AI gives, what I want you to do is compare it to the sorts of answers that a pretty good graduate student would give, because that's my next best alternative. And what I've discovered is that a very well-coded and prompted AI can be about as effective as an early career teacher, which is to say my next best alternative, a pretty good teaching assistant. And for you, I don't know what your next best alternative is. It could be that it's no extra resources for the students. It could be that you're willing to give them plenty of your time. But whatever it is, I want you to compare the AI's output to that next best alternative. With that, let me turn it over to Joshua.
Hey, everybody. Let me get my screen shared here. All right. So I see in the chat and I see in the Q&A, people want to get to actually seeing things and not just talking about kind of the theory or why here. I hear you, we're going to get there. We are. But one thing I want to bring up is that your students have access to ChatGPT, right? They are, am I sharing my screen? Can you see my screen, Justin?
Yep.
Yes.
All set.
All right, cool. Justin was giving me a weird look. I want to make sure I wasn't.
Oh, that's my funny face.
So if they have ChatGPT, they have access to this. Don't they already have access to the technology that we're kind of advocating that we should create? And the answer is kind of, but not really, right? They have this chat bot that is basically ask anything, right? That's literally what OpenAI puts in that field there for them to put in. And the analogy here is that if you give people a blank piece of paper and a marker, how many of them will draw something of substance and value? And how many of them will doodle for a bit and leave with nothing useful after that exercise, right? So ChatGPT is like that for students. It is this blank box of technology that just does things for them. They put in words, they put in images, and it outputs things to them, right? But what problem is that really solving in terms of their learning and in terms of solving that 2 sigma problem? Like, how do we effectively move students, kind of bridge that chasm between where they're at now and where they could go with that one-on-one tutoring? And it really comes down to this idea that students don't know what they don't know, right? Could they become better AI users? Potentially. But to do so, they have to be able to have that reflective step, to be able to say, I don't understand this, and I want to figure out how to understand that. Or to even say, I don't understand or I don't know what I don't know, right? And so undirected chatbots kind of lead to one outcome, right? A utility optimizing student has one very clear advantageous use of AI that we're all intimately familiar with now after ChatGPT coming on the scene a few years ago. and that is cheating, right? Like it is so easy for them to do this, right? You don't even have to copy and paste anymore. You just point your phone at your computer screen and it can read it and see it and do all of these things. And in the future, there are these cutting edge tools coming online now that a lot of people have where the AI can just control your computer. It can just go in and act as you in your browser, seeing what you're seeing, clicking on buttons. If it's a homework question, well, it can just read it itself and select the answer that is correct. And so these types of tools are great for certain types of productivity in the workplace, but they're really difficult to use for actual learning, right? And so I'm going to move ahead here. So what we need to focus on is what is the actual underlying problem? It's not that students don't have enough access to knowledge, right? That's actually an abundance now, right? They have access to not just, library and books, but the world at their fingertips, literally in their pockets in a computer, right? The thing that is scarce is not, are there books out there I can read to help me? It's which books do I pick out? What do I do to fill those knowledge gaps, right? It's the understanding of those knowledge gaps that is scarce. And if they knew how to answer the questions they had, they knew what they needed to do, they could already do that, right? There are low cost, low value things out there like Google, right? But to get at understanding their knowledge gaps, that's where that one-on-one tutoring comes in, right? You have that person talking to you, and that person can listen to you, have a discourse with you, and in a way, kind of running through this pedagogical checklist or diagnostic of where is this student struggling? And so personalization is essential. So we have to create solutions to the real scarcity problem. And that is that each student comes with a unique set of knowledge and skills that also come, they need support that can adapt to their personal situation to help solve that knowledge gap scarcity. And so today I'm going to show two applications. One's an idea still. It is not an actual thing that you could go out and use with your class today. But I think it is a good application of where things can be going very quickly with using AI for personalized tutoring. And that is going to be this personalized engagement with content. So I'm going to now switch to showing something that I can actually share out with everyone after the call, and you can use it too. And this is what I'm calling Project ACE, is AI-led content engagement. Now, in my role as a senior product manager at the company, like it is my job to figure out how can we find solutions to problems and implement them at the scale that we need to support you in your instruction. And that is what I tried to do with Project ACE. I'm going to stop sharing so I can pull up exactly what I want to pull up and share. All right. I'm assuming everybody is now seeing a web page for
Yes.
Project ACE.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So the goal here is to really use AI to find a solution that isn't just giving students answers to whatever questions they don't even know what to ask to fill their knowledge gaps, but to turn that on its head and use AI to elucidate those knowledge gaps to the student. Right. And so in this tutorial, in this prototype here, we use, we're a publishing company. We publish Justin's book. And so we use that as a base of material or content that the student can work through. So I'm going to switch to Principles of Economics 2E here, and then I'm going to go to, I'll just pick 6.1, how taxes and subsidies change markets. Then I'm going to start ACE. And what is happening, and this is where it becomes really important to be careful about how we're designing AI tools, is that we are combining sophisticated instructions and prompting techniques to the AI, plus grounding that in the truth of, for example, Justin's textbook, right? So we're giving it very clear information on what to follow, and then creating an experience around that that really helps the student understand and drives them through this material. And so here, you'll notice this isn't just a chatbot sitting there open for the student to ask whatever questions they want. the AI is leading the students through the content. Right? It says, hey there, I'm Ace, and today we're diving into the section of the textbook that I selected. We'll explore how taxes and subsidies influence supply and demand. To get started, though, tell me in a few words something you learned from this section. What stood out to you? Right? And so in this prototype, I also have this textbook tab here. And if I click that, I can actually view a form of Justin's textbook. And things like links are broken. That's expected because this is just a prototype I threw together. Student read this and come back, and I can say something like, I thought the sugar tax was cool, or however your students might talk. Oh, that sugar tax was dope, if you will, or whatever. And so what is happening now is we're getting the innate personalization that comes through using these like cutting edge large language models, right? The student can put anything they want to there. Like this is a live demo. I didn't preload this with anything, right? And so it starts talking back to the student. That's definitely an interesting example. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. What happens when a tax like the sugar tax is imposed on sellers? Now, what happens to the supply curve? Right? So now the AI is taking the initiative to start driving the student through that material and leading them through the content, as opposed to just the student having to figure out how to go through the content themselves. Or, as we all know, students don't really read that much anymore, right? Beg them all you want before class. Unless you incentivize them, they're not going to do it, right? And so here I can go through and I can output something in wrong. It goes down. You're on the right track. It does change, but instead of going down, here's what actually happens. And then it, again, brings it back to the student about why are you thinking this way? What are you thinking about? Why do you think shifts in supply curves leads to decrease in the equilibrium quantity of sugar drinks sold? And I could go through this conversation more and more and more, but you get the idea. Right? This is really about finding that way that we can leverage AI, and instead of just using it for this kind of like we're personalizing based on things students have already done, we're using that personalization to actually move students through the material. I also have a notion here that's really important with this is that we need to find ways that we can actually check students' mastery of this content. Because it's one thing, great, students can have this conversation and go through it, but how do we have that feedback loop to both them and potentially the instructor about what students are learning here? So I have an idea here of, as students are going through this, we should be checking as they're continuing through this conversation, whether they're gaining understanding or they're just representing their own understanding. Right? And so here what's happening is ACE is taking this entire transcript of messages, which imagine this is a much longer thing, and going through it. And it's actually doing this judgment call of, is the student learning or demonstrating their learning of this material, just like that personal one-on-one tutor would be doing, right? That one-on-one tutor would be running through that. I called it a pedagogical diagnostic before, and going through and seeing, is the student being able to demonstrate understanding? Here, it's a short conversation. I could go on if I wanted to, but here it's not giving credit for anything, right? As you probably wouldn't if this was your student going through this. They said a few words and then finished. But one of the other really important pieces of personalization, which we'll touch on again in a little bit, is that these large language models aren't just really good at English. They're really good at a lot of languages because they have been trained on such a massive amount of written content. Right? And so I could easily speak to the AI in Spanish. And based on my instructions, it should return back to me something in the language that I put in, right? And so with the models we're using here, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of languages that it supports natively, right? This is like the benefit we get from just leveraging this technology. There's nothing super special that has to go into this. I have some stuff written on the side of my screen that I'm copying and pasting here. That was Spanish. This is Chinese. And I have no idea if what I'm putting in here is correct or not. I just use Google Translate to give me something like speak to me in this language in different languages. But the LLMs are capable of producing content in many of the languages that students actually would converse in, right? And so you can think of some future state here right? Where we're personalizing to the student, not just on what language they can speak or they prefer to speak in, not just on how they're performing inside of this one instance, right? But we can take what they've done in this conversation, save some of that to continue the personalization in the future. Right, to say to the student, we're going to better meet you where you need us to start meeting you at, as opposed to starting over from scratch. And then I also have down here at the bottom this notion of like a secondary check. Like one, we're checking in time, in real time, if the student's doing these things. We can also kind of check to see, did the student make a good faith effort in this scenario, in this tutoring session, right? And so here you get this feedback here, where you have this final evaluation result of 0 here because the AI decided that my few words that I dropped in here wasn't good enough to give me credit. And so what I really, I think there's a lot of potential for this idea, but it's in early stages. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can go back to the presentation. But oh, my screens are going a little bit crazy here. Bear with me, I apologize.
I mean, you could have me sing for you, Josh.
Would you sing? I didn't sing. Would you sing, Justin?
Someone's going to
So
have to sing here.
Australia's national song is Waltzing Matilda. It's the
Do
only
it.
thing Australian men know how to sing when they go drinking. But fortunately, your slides are up, so I'm going to spare everyone a verse.
Terribly disappointing.
You started this, so you got to finish it, Justin. But I really need your input, right? As a product manager, my goal isn't to just make these flashy prototypes that do something. I want to co-design and work with instructors to solve real problems, both for you and for your students, right? And so I've been inviting anybody who wants to try out this Project ACE and actually try it for themselves. We can share out the link. It's accessible to anybody with a link. I would love for you to give it a whirl, right? Try it out, try to break it, and then tell me what works for it, what doesn't, how you can see it actually working in your classroom, whether it would add value to you, whether it would get us closer to closing that 2 sigma gap we've talked about. All right. And inside the app, there's a link to a short survey and feedback that I would really, really love to get some additional people looking at this so that we can decide what is the next step here. All right, so that's the before class part.
Let me take
Now,
over. Let me take over for a moment, Joshua.
yeah,
So you're going to have to stop sharing.
I'm getting there.
All right. And okay, so first of all, let me show you the link that Joshua just set up as a QR code. So if you've got your phone, just right there. And in the meantime, Joshua will pull the link out and also just throw it in the chat for you. But I want to be clear, what we're showing you is like the hottest of hot off the presses prototypes. It's literally a prototype. That's why it's not beautiful. It's an idea, and it's an idea we couldn't wait to share with our fellow economists. Because we're just 2 guys in a lab trying to figure out what to do next. And so we really do want and value your feedback. Let me show you one other thing that we can do with Project ACE, which is that your students, as they're typing into the LLM, are creating a written record of what they're struggling with. And we can see in a very direct sense what concepts they're struggling with. And so therefore, effectively what this does is generates a very large unstructured text data set of your students' struggles. Of course, what can we do with a large unstructured data set? We can feed it into an LLM. And so one of the things we're working on is, can we in the back end take the student conversations as they're trying to figure out what's going on, and then have the LLM output for you 4 bullet points that you can read on the way to class. Students have problems with this definition. Students need more work on this particular issue, and so on, so that you can become a more effective teacher. So that's what we're talking about doing before class. Then what would happen during class? Well, we already know. You're the star, you're the razzle-dazzle. you know how to teach. Your job is to go in and do that and to be amazing. And so then we're also here to help you after class. And what is it we do after class? We typically assign homework. We have to make sure that it's relatively low stakes so that students don't just have ChatGPT do it for them. And they're going to struggle. And that's a productive struggle. And what we want to do is find ways that we can help them with that productive struggle. But before we go there, I want to talk a little more about what is it you would hope for from that productive struggle. You know, could you send your students home as if they were at Oxford with a one-on-one tutor? What would you want from the perfect tutor that would work one-on-one with your students? You'd want them to be smart, with an almost perfect knowledge of economics. You'd want them to be, in fact, to have read every page that you'd assigned as readings. You'd want them to have looked at your PowerPoint slides. You'd want them to use language the way you do. You'd want them to be adaptable and to understand the way you're trying to teach your course, to use the language that you use. You'd want them to be empathetic and to pay attention to what each student needs. And so those three things are, I think, the secret to one-on-one tutoring as it exists in a place like Oxford. But actually, the AI allows us to do a little more, things that Bloom never dreamed of. It also allows us to be available when and where each student needs most help, and in the language in which they need help. So Joshua's going to demonstrate the second of these ideas that we have. This one's actually already in the field, and people who are using my textbook already, hopefully you've got it turned on and your students are enjoying having a tutor available to them all the time. But let me just quickly go through each of these big ideas. So if you wanted a tutor, the first thing is you want your tutor to always know the answer to the student's questions. And this is simply to reassure you that ChatGPT does know the answer to your students' questions. And so we see at the bottom here, way back with ChatGPT 3.5, that it was able to get a 99% on the TUS macro, the test of undergraduate curriculum in economics, I think it is, a standardized economics test. It got 91% in micro. That was ChatGPT 3.5. We're about to get 4.5. That's going to be 100% any day now. AP micro and AP macro, which are roughly meant to be consistent with the level we're teaching at, it's getting 100%. It's getting 90% on the bar exam. It's nailing the LSAT. It's probably better at getting into graduate school than I was with the GREs. So this is a tool that truly knows its work. And so the answers coming out of GPT 4.5 will just blow you away. These things are, you know, they're doing well on math Olympiads and so on. The second thing you want, though, is you want to make sure that your tutor is customized to your course. So here's an example of something I put into ChatGPT actually earlier this morning. My econ teacher said the natural rate is 2% and falling. They said it may even be negative. What does this mean? Now, we economists have lots of different natural rates we talk about. Sometimes we talk about the natural rate of output. Sometimes we talk about the natural rate of unemployment. Sometimes we talk about the natural rate of interest. And it's only within the confines of your course that those definitions and the way we think about things are particularly nailed down. You've made choices that you want your students to respect and understand. And so we see here, this is an untrained, this is just ChatGPT off the shelf. And it says, well, if you said natural rate, you must be talking about the natural rate of unemployment, even though you talked about it becoming negative. So it is failing to give good advice. Now, if instead, what we do is we train the AI literally on the course materials you have your students read. And so in this case, I'm showing you just an example of the tool that Joshua was going to show you in a moment, where it's a question about the natural rate of output. And because this tool has been trained on the textbook, and we can also train it on your PowerPoint slides and so on, it's going to give exactly the right answer. So it teaches your material your way. Next, if you had a tutor, you'd really want it to be empathetic. And right now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't know, I'm pretty empathetic. I'm way more empathetic than any computer. And so here I want to show you the results of a study. So this is a study in which they took patient complaints, and either you could complain, you could send your symptoms off to a physician or to ChatGPT. And then a board of actual physicians rated the diagnoses that came back either from the physician or from ChatGPT. And so those healthcare professionals rated 22% of the diagnoses from the physicians as being good or very good, but 79% from ChatGPT. Okay, so that's just telling you ChatGPT is very good. It's a very good diagnostician. It gives very good healthcare advice. But here I was saying what we want is something that's empathetic. Now here it's worth remembering, what does it mean to be empathetic? It's to see someone. It's to really try to listen. And the problem is we are humans. And I get tired. And as my children will tell you, I get cranky. And I get frustrated. And I fail, as my therapist will tell you, I fail to empathize. And it turns out that it's not just me. These same physicians, they were asked to give medical advice. And then this board of healthcare professionals rated that advice as either being empathetic or very empathetic. 5% of the time that the physicians gave medical advice, it was rated as empathetic or very empathetic. I have a feeling that physicians are not much more empathetic than economists. Neither of us have a particularly good reputation. But the thing is, ChatGPT is polite, is well-mannered, doesn't get tired, and is relentlessly upbeat. And so 45% of the time it was rated as being empathetic. And so I think actually these tutors can sometimes do a better job at the soft skills than some of us. Not always, but in some domains some of the time. Now, the other thing you would want from a tutor is for it to be available and to work long hours, to be available when and where students need the most help. And so this is an example that comes from a genuine chat log using our tutor, and it's something I quite love. So it's actually a chemistry student, so the same technology applied to chemistry. Student says, it's late at night, I need to go to sleep, but I should do this now. And they're working through their chem problem set. So what does the AI tutor that Joshua designed say back? It says, I understand you're feeling tired. It's important to get a good night's sleep for your overall well-being and learning efficiency. How about we continue this tomorrow when you're feeling refreshed? You'll be able to grasp these concepts much better after a good rest. What do you think? And the student understands and feels seen and appreciated and understands this empathy. Says, okay. And the tutor reminds, well, remember, it's important to balance study with rest. Sleep well and we'll tackle these problems when you're ready. Good night. Student says, thanks. The student then goes to sleep. Literally wakes up the next morning and the student says, I'm back. And the tutor says, welcome back. Hope you're feeling refreshed, ready to continue working on that next chemical reaction. And so this is what I mean when I say it's empathetic. But the other thing it is available. So the thing about me is I only work a set number of hours a day. Generally, I tend to wake up very early, but I'm in the office maybe 9 to 5. When we think about when students need help, it's actually very rarely between 9 and 5. And so the thing that having an AI tutor does is it makes something available 24 hours a day. And here we're showing you genuine usage logs of when students are logging on and using the tutor. And so the grey bars are when basically most of us will no longer be in our office. It's between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next morning. And you'll see there's very sharp spikes in usage once we go home, once we're not available, once office hours are not being held. And so the wonderful thing about these AI tutors is that they're available when the students need them, and that's often 3 a.m. They're also available where the students need them, right? All of us as instructors know the difficulty of getting students to come and visit us during office hours. But the thing about the laptop which has access to the AI tutor is that's always with the student. It's in their dorm room right there with them. And we also think that there is really an accessibility question here, which is it's often thought that first generation and underrepresented minority students, low-income students, are less likely to take advantage of office hours. They don't necessarily understand what they're for. They're worried about making a fool of themselves. But people are much less worried about making a fool of themselves in front of an AI tutor than a human tutor. And then finally, I want to come back to the thing that Joshua was talking about before, which is the other thing these tools allow us to do is to meet the students in the language that they're most comfortable. Learning economics is already a very difficult language to master. Trying to do that while you're speaking a second and third language, there's very good reason why we should give much of our instruction is in English. But there's also very good reason when a student is struggling with a concept and they're tired and they want to master the concept without having to master English simultaneously, that we should give them the space and the time to be able to speak their own language. And so this map here is showing you that, yes, if you're from California or Texas, you're probably not surprised to learn that there are a large number of your students who speak a language other than English at home. So in order to dig at this, what I did is I took the American Community Survey and I found anyone who was an economics major, and then that asks a question about which language they speak at home. But the point that I want to make here is that multilingual students is not just a California and Texas issue in New York. If you think about where is it that at least 1 in 10 economics majors speaks a language other than English at home, it's almost everywhere. Which means that no matter who you are, unless you're in a very, very small number of places in the United States, no matter what, I can be pretty confident that at least 1 in 10 of your students might be more comfortable in a language other than English. And so thinking about multilingual options, I think, is incredibly important in terms of increasing accessibility to economics. Now, it turns out that roughly 1 in 4 students speak a language other than English at home, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, this just means we need to also have materials available in Spanish. But it turns out if you take that pink slice there and divide it up, actually Spanish is only 1/4 of that. The languages that our students speak is actually an incredibly diverse array. Spanish gets 1 in 4 of our students, Chinese 1 in 6, Hindi 1 in 9, and then you've got a slew of much smaller languages which are spoken by really 1 in 8 of our students. So half of those who speak another language, and that is 1/4 of all students. So it would be very difficult for you or I to learn all these languages, or for any university to offer instruction in all of these languages. But fortunately, the OpenAI is coded in all of these languages, can speak all of these languages, can speak to 99.2% of students who speak another language. And so I think this is a big win in terms of expanding accessibility to economics. So having said that, let me pass the baton back to Joshua.
All right, so I'm going to use the last few minutes here to demonstrate. Now, this is not just an idea. This is an in-product feature called the AI Tutor. And as we said, with ACE, that's an idea. It's about before class, can we engage with students in the content? This, though, is about providing that just-in-time help to students. It's personalized to their misconceptions, their problems, helping them answer that I don't know what I don't know question and problem. Before I do that, though, if you are an Achieve user or you begin using our platform, you can enable the AI Tutor down here in your course setup page. Just turn that on, and it now will be available to your students for certain types of homework assignments. But I'm going to pivot back to a course I already have set up to show, and I want to dig into the elasticity chapter, and specifically the end of chapter problem set on elasticity, which I remember helping with Justin and Betsy doing these end of chapter questions fondly years ago. But what I want to show is how we can use AI, again, in a very specific way to solve this pedagogical problem. Right? So I'm just going to put in answers to this question that are wrong. Right? Maybe this is a student who's flipped up what elastic or inelastic means. Right? Before I even start, I can go to the tutor. Oh, sorry, I need to reset. I can go to the tutor and begin a conversation, but I have limited access. I can kind of click these buttons to start getting a little bit of help behind the scenes, right? And so first, it offers a little bit of help here. Like, are items, are they necessities, or are there many substitutes? Like, just a tad bit of information to help that student toward understanding or toward demonstrating their understanding of this content. I can't talk with it. I can't type yet, but as soon as I submit an answer, I get a little bit of human authored feedback at the top here. I'm going to move this to the side a little bit so we can see everything in my window. Right? And then I can actually start having a conversation with the AI tutor. Maybe I say, I don't understand why my answer is wrong. Help me. And it'll start giving me information. Right? Again, it starts talking about necessities and substitutes. I can say something like IDK. I don't know. So one of the other benefits of having this in a platform like this is that we now have over 13, almost 14 million messages between the AI and students. Right? Of that, about 4 million are specifically from econ students, just in the last calendar year. Right? It's in use at over 200 institutions that are 200 econ institutions or higher ed econ institutions. Right? So we have a lot of information that is coming in, and we can use that to iteratively improve our approach here. So one thing we saw was that students are excellent at gaming systems, and they realized that if they could just keep dropping in things like IDK over and over and over, that eventually the AI it's trained by their providers like OpenAI to be very helpful. Right? It's literally going to give you an answer and try to make you happy. That's how these things work. Right? And so we ended up having to make interventions that happen dynamically behind the scenes. So for example, if we detect that a student is just repeating themselves over and over and over, we actually in real time change the behavior of the AI. Like we say, nope, you got to actually try this yourself. We're here to help. We're not going to just give you the answer. And by doing that, we actually are able to monitor the AI's behavior and adjust it in real time. I have a data scientist on my team. I tell him that he should make the first course in robot psychology because he literally spends all of his time analyzing how to make the AIs change their behavior based on student input. And there's some fascinating things he's discovered through actually digging into all of this data. Right. But the key here is that we can provide that help to students wherever they're at the time they need it, their availability. And just like in Project ACE I showed before, if I started talking, I'll just grab again my Spanish text I have saved over here. It'll start talking back in the language I put in. We actually have real users in courses, and they've adopted using the AI Tutor simply because it can speak in many languages. A lot of international institutions have chosen to adopt this because it helps with bridging that gap between wanting to use the textbooks and the material that are published in the United States in their courses, but now it's accessible to them, right? Because their students can now engage with the material in a way that they can better understand. And so all of these things go toward meeting that student where they're at. And just for the sake of time, I can also show, I'll switch to another question here. The tutor can work on, I'll submit a blank answer. It can help with lots of different types of questions, right? It doesn't matter whether it's the simple multiple choice, sorting, or numeric like this. It still functions all the same way because we are feeding it all of the content needed to provide a good experience. And I also want to show off our interactive graphs in Justin's book. These work with the AI Tutor as well. These are graphs that you can change and move, and you can learn about the economics through actually dynamically changing these. And the AI Tutor functions just the same on these types of questions as others. So yeah, these are, Justin, do you want to take over to show the end? Because we only have 3 minutes here. This is actually something you can also use. And if you go to our Macmillan Learning site, I'm sure that Scott will share it out afterwards. You can actually try it out and use it to see if you think it would be beneficial for your course. And again, it's grounded in our content. It's grounded in how we present the content in our homeworks, in our books, that type of thing.
Joshua, do you want to just quit sharing for a moment?
Oh, sorry.
And actually, let me not talk through slides, but just talk to folks directly. First of all, you've seen two things today. Hopefully, you found some of the economic background and some of the engineering background to try and understand why it's not just enough to say use ChatGPT. Hopefully, you found some of that helpful. You've seen two things today. I want to be absolutely clear. The first of those, the pre-class work, that's just an idea Joshua and I have come up with, and we're showing you because we want to know whether people are going to be interested. We have folks at Macmillan we need to convince to give us lots of money to make sure that we can put it in your classroom. And so your feedback is going to be intensely helpful, both in helping bring this forward and also in reshaping it so it works the way that will be best for all of our students. The other thing is just I want to more broadly give you some confidence. AI is in many occupations and for many people a threat. It's upending the way we're doing things. And this is a time of enormous anxiety, and you need yet one more piece of anxiety. So, what I really want to end on is just to reassure you that Joshua and I are here in your corner. There's going to be a lot coming down the pike with AI. We're going to make sure that we're on top of it. We're going to make sure that we will do the coding and the nerd work and getting out there and talking to people and the market testing, and hopefully give you tools so that you can be amazing. And so, if we achieve nothing else today, I hope at the very least we can make you feel a little less anxious and perhaps even a little more excited by what's coming down the pike as our industry is in the midst of what I think is going to be an amazing transformation.
Thank you, everybody. We are at time, and we want to respect your time and end on time. We appreciate your interest. We appreciate your participation today. We will be sending the recording out. We will be sending the slides out alongside the recording. In the email that you get, you'll be able to request access to Achieve, which has the AI Tutor in it. You can also get a one-on-one demo of the AI Tutor from, she's actually on the session, from Carita Dos Santos, our product specialist and trainer. We call her DSS, but that doesn't mean anything to you. Thank you again. You can reply to the email you get, and it'll come right to me. So we want to continue this conversation. We will continue this conversation. We look forward to what you have to say. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Fax. All right, are we clear?
Mostly, I think most people are off. Could you please send me those slides? Because we would love to include them in the follow-up. People love to get the slides.
And I owe you an apology, Joshua. I went from my upstairs computer and forgot to hit Control S. Can you believe it? That was what it was.